Hey everybody, so for today's video I'm going to be taking a look at three different Final Fantasy fan theories, ones relating to Final Fantasy 8 in particular. The reason why I'm doing this is because I've always had, it's kind of like a weird obsession with these different fan theories, particularly ones relating to games. And one of the first ones I can think of, well the first one I remember seeing anyway, was the Squall is Dead theory relating to Final Fantasy 8. This is the first one we're going to look at, and then we'll look at a couple more. So, for starters, what is the Squall is Dead theory? So, basically, this theory poses the idea that at the end of Disc 1, when we see Squall after the fight with the deer, he gets attacked with the Ice Shard, and then he's actually dead from Disc 2 onwards. And the reason why they kind of look at the game this way is because they feel like the game gets too crazy from Disc 2 onwards. That's basically the extent of it. So first of all, we'll look at it. So yeah, as it says here, the theory itself. At the end of Disc 1, Squall and his friends face Edea on the parade float in Deling City. After the fight, Edea seems defeated, but then she conjures an enormous ice shard and propels it through Squall's chest. Squall scrambles back and falls off the platform. He sees Rinoa above, reaching to him as he falls. Squall closes his eyes and dies. The entire remaining game, from the beginning of Disc 2 to the second half of the ending movie, is a dream. A dream? A dream, a fantasy, a vision, or whatever you want to call it. It's basically an extent of your life flashing before your eyes concept. The entire dream takes only a matter of seconds, but for Squall it passes in real time. So yeah. And here's their evidence, because obviously the interpretation story is that it's just like an old fantasy game, but here's their evidence anyway. So you've become just a memory. So if you remember at the end of Disc 1, there's the part where they go to Galbadia, the players, after the events in Timber, when they try attacking the president and Edea appears, and then she disappears with Seifer. And then if you remember, when they're in the I think it's like the waiting hall or whatever, the guy from one of the guys from Galbadia comes and explains everything that happens, and he says that the that Seifer's going to be put to death. And then kind of Squall has this thought in his head where, is this how people are going to speak about me? You know, I'm just going to be a memory. People are going to forget about me. That sort of thing. So they're basically saying that that's essentially like foreshadowing. And then the second part of evidence is that him not having any wounds when he wakes up in the desert prison on Disc 2. So he actually says, where am I? I challenged Edea. My wounds. No wounds. How? The Galbadian soldiers. We were surrounded. He was there. Seifer. Leaning down at me. Damn you, Seifer. So their point is that there's no way he could have survived that at all. You know, it's just a bit too unfeasible, even though, you know, it's called Final Fantasy and everything. And then there's also this whole aspect here where they're saying that the story, basically everything revolves around Squall from this point onward. If you remember, a lot of the plot twists and the silly elements happen from Disc 2 onwards. You know, like not to spoil too much, but the final villain, for example, appearing, and then obviously we have the Mumbas, for example, which it says here, these weird little red line Pokemons that just seem to come out of nowhere. And then you also have what's his name, Norg as well, who secretly is the real person in charge, the one who funded Garden anyway. And then also this idea where the idea of fate itself, sorry, and that Squall is like the only person who can save everything. And then obviously the whole romantic plot line revolving around Rinoa, when clearly she had feelings for Seifer in the first game, or the first disc, sorry, when they first meet. And when she finds out he was dead, she feels really sad as well, because it's like the first person she loved or something. But really, in my opinion, you know, this is all like with a lot of these theories as well, it's all very tenuous, really, because you know, it is a fantasy game after all. Yeah, obviously we have the ending as well. This is the final piece of evidence before we get into everything else. The idea that the ending is so sort of crazy and surreal, like it's just because obviously, you know, you have Squall there on his own. You have this bit where you see just the faded images of Sifa, Rinoa, everything, and then, you know, these sort of flashbacks, and obviously this little section here. This is as you can see in the back here as well. That's kind of like the main image, and that's like their main supporting evidence, really. And then obviously, yeah, there's this image here with the space plotline. That's another one of the crazy things as well, like him happening to save Rinoa, and the fact that everything ends too perfectly as well. Okay, the saying is, if this was really how the game was meant to be interpreted, why did they make? If this wasn't, sorry, why did they make the dream so subtle? I can think of 50 ways to make it the process. So they're trying to use the movie Vanilla Sky as well as an example, but again, this stuff is all too tenuous in my opinion, because it's like they're trying to confirm their own bias here, if you know what I mean. Like, the whole dream thing goes off the idea that he can't survive the ice shards, but in my opinion, because, you know, it is a Final Fantasy game, and, you know, the whole idea that because obviously now I'm just going to break down each section and why I don't think it works. You know, the whole point that you won't be able to survive that just doesn't really work, because it's a fantasy game. It's called Final Fantasy. You know, you heal, use Phoenix Downs to heal after battles and stuff. You know, you can use white magic and all sorts of stuff like that. Again, that goes into the whole wounds thing, because obviously Edea is just a really powerful sorceress. She could just heal them herself, because obviously they still want them alive for evidence. And then this idea that the plot kind of goes crazy as well. You know, that's just a pretty standard thing for a lot of fantasy games, where everything starts off very standard and grounded, but then also, you know, disc 1, some kind of crazy stuff happens as well, you know, because you have the whole the first thing you have to do is meet your teacher at the front gate and go into a cave to fight a fire demon, Ifrit, you know, which is, it's just, that's not exactly normal, is it? And you have these GFs which live inside a part of your brain which give you power to fight. You know, you're drawing stuff from monsters. Monsters are just a normal thing around the world, you know. It is called Final Fantasy. And the whole Norg thing, it is actually possible to see the Shimi village on the first disc. You know, it does exist on the map, and you can actually see them. So, you know, that's not too much of a stretch. Plus, it's just meant to be more of a twist, because, you know, it was just meant to make that whole section where you return to the garden a bit more action-packed and have some more weight to it. And also, it's meant to be like give a bit more depth to Cid himself as a character, because it's kind of like his mistake of taking money from Norg, even though, you know, he does just come out of nowhere in a way. And, you know, the plot is a bit silly in 8 anyway, isn't it? So we can all agree with that. But I don't think you need to come up with this whole crazy theory to justify it. You can like the game without needing to do that, in my opinion. And then what was the other bit of evidence there? Then obviously the ending itself, you know, it's the plot explains this itself. Like they say, it's time compression, because you have to compress time to see Ultimecia and defeat her, and then they're lost, but then their memories of each other are kind of what help them. So that's why he's seeing Rinoa, and the beginning of the game, which is you know, the opening cinematic. Sorry, there's the whole bit where he says, "Will you find me when?" Or she recites to Squall, "Will you find me? You will find me here when you're lost," or whatever, or "Will you find me here?" Whatever it is, you know. That's kind of foreshadowing to the ending, really. But yeah, I think it's still, you know, I don't mean to beat on these people too much, or the person who did this, because it's still a really interesting interpretation. But, you know, it's just not true, is it? I feel like I'm going to say that about all these theories, but it's still really interesting, I think. But yeah, that's the end of this theory. It's still a really cool one, and yeah, it's like written on 2008, so yeah, it's quite an old one. yeah, it's cool. This person was also claiming that already and made this canon. What? Oh, just remake 8 and make it canon. Yeah. Um, yeah. Let's check out the next one. This is another interesting one. This theory I really like as well. This is the Rinoa as Ultimecia theory. So in a nutshell, there will be an Ultimecia in the future, her existence, and to defeat are inevitable. You cannot change the past, and Ultimecia's death in the past created the present and future. Now, what if that Ultimecia was not a random person yet to be born, but one of the fighters who would perceive her own life, tragic destiny. Okay, so basically the theory is that Rinoa, living for a few hundred years longer than her peers, her exact life could be the result of being sealed by Esther technology and and yeah. So essentially, that what they're saying here is that the reason why she wants to actually compress time is because Squall is dead and she wants to be close to Squall, and that's why they kind of make the point that Squall has to be the one to kill her, because he died and he's meant to be the one to protect her, basically. So the motive, when she's corrupted basically by his passing. Yeah, she's playing the part of being evil because she remembers everything but realizes that her campaign needs to happen for her younger self to be happy, if only for a brief moment. So it still plays off the idea, like the game itself, of like a what do you call it, like a time paradox or whatever, where things have to happen. As Ultimecia dies, this realization falls. So yeah, the supporting evidence here is that the world hates witches, and that's kind of what makes her despise humanity itself. Yeah, and then the next bit of evidence here is the Guardian forces. So Griever being the main one, because obviously Griever is related to Squall, and her Ultimecia using Griever is basically, you know, her connection to Squall, because if you remember, she took his ring at the end of Disc 3, I think it was, or something, and then obviously then the other guardians in her castle as well are kind of representations of some of the other summons, like Tiamat being a corrupted Bahuma, and Omega being based on Omega Weapon. And then there's also Rinoa's foreshadowing as well. On the Ragnarok Disc 3, as Rinoa dreads her impending future, I don't want the future. I want the present to stand still. I want to stay here with you. And then obviously, I guess it's okay if it's you, Squall, no one else. So basically trying to put forward the idea that, you know, she just wants to capture this moment with Squall still, and that's why she's trying to compress time. And then the Squall's vision. As Squall lays dying in a wasteland outside of time, he sees bizarre imagery. He sees Rinoa dying. He sees Rinoa's face juxtaposition against Ultimecia's face. Yeah, so that's obviously another point that yeah, he cries afterwards as well, because he's sort of, it's like he's realized or something, I guess is what they're trying to say there. And then there's Adia's foreshadowing as well. After passing on her sorcerer's power, she looks back and on when she first saw Ultimecia at the orphanage, and I now understand that there is an end, no matter how painful it may be. Therefore, Squall, you may fight to the end, even though it may bring tragedy to others. So she knows that they must fight Ultimecia and the time paradox. But the tragedy she is referring to is obviously, just trying to say it's Rinoa. And then also there's another point they're making here, that the aesthetic style, that Rinoa and Ultimecia kind of look pretty similar. And that the mansion itself, Rinoa grew up in a mansion, so she has a castle because she, you know, similar style in a way. And then obviously as Ultimecia dies, she reflects on her childhood. Well, she says to the seeds, reflect on your childhoods, your sensations, your words, your emotions. Time, it will not wait, no matter how hard you hold on. It escapes you. It escapes you. So she speaks it. It's not something you really say to an enemy, if you know what I mean. So it seems like something she's trying to like impart onto them. And then there's another one, Dissidia's weapons as well. Ultimecia's weapon shares the same name with Rinoa's as well, which is the shooting star Valkyrie. And the other one there, these weapon name dubbed with Rinoa basically. So yeah, that's another point. And then obviously it sort of goes over a few other things that happen with the villains as well. That the idea that the villain just having no connection doesn't really make sense, if that's kind of the point they're trying to say. They're basically trying to explain why Ultimecia would just appear out of nowhere. But really, I think, again, even though it's a cool theory, yeah, obviously it's not really the intention. Obviously the whole point, it's not the first time they've just pulled a villain out of nowhere in Final Fantasy. If you remember, obviously Necron being one from Final Fantasy VIII. With him though, he's meant to represent death, which is kind of the theme of the game. And obviously you had in Final Fantasy IV, if you remember, we had what's his name as well? I want to say Exdeath, but it's not. His name's not Exdeath. But yeah, we had the main villain from Final Fantasy IV, who just kind of comes out of nowhere. They just say, yeah, this Zeramus, sorry, is his name. He just appears out of nowhere, and it's like, yeah, he's controlling things, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think another thing is that like the look of Rinoa and thingy, that's just a limitation of time, if you will, because the it didn't have the most detailed models. It was just kind of a few basic models, and it was just like a couple of features that can differentiate them. So their similarities is not that kind of out there, really, I would say. And then some of this foreshadowing, I think, is just being read wrong, in my opinion. Like the idea that, like what Rinoa is saying here, I wouldn't really say that's foreshadowing. That's just more them connecting. It's meant to be the big romantic moment between them. Because if I remember, after this, you have the kind of the love ballad playing as well. I think it's Rinoa's theme, isn't it? Yeah, and obviously the whole point of the the whole point of Final Fantasy VIII, or the main theme, is fate and trying to change it, if you will. Are things predetermined, or do we have control of them ourselves? Because obviously, you have Laguna and you have Squall, the father and the son. Kind of, Squall is kind of trying to redeem the mistakes of his father, if you will, because he gets with Rinoa, unlike his father getting with Rain, or with Julia rather, twice, where he wasn't there for either one of them in the end. Yeah, it's really, that's kind of the whole point. So ultimately she kind of represents the theme of the game, similar to what I was saying with Zeramus or with Necron. But anyway, that's that one. Also, another thing to mention is that both of these theories were also kind of thrown out there from Katase himself, who was a scenario writer for 8, if you remember. In fact, I think he's been pretty much working on Final Fantasy from like 7 or something, if I remember correctly. But yeah, obviously they're not real, but they're still cool. There is one more here which is kind of interesting. This one I really like, actually. So this one is actually referring to 15. So there's a connection between 15 and 8. So it's down. There's a couple of things. One, it's to do with the Ring of Solomon. If you remember, this is an item you get from Final Fantasy VIII, the one that allows you to get Doom Train. But it says here, legend goes that it was a ring that belonged to a royal family. And if you look, there's a very a similar look between the two rings as well. So they're trying to pose the idea that Final Fantasy 15 happened in the past of 8, or rather 8 is in the distant future of 15, which is a really cool one. Obviously, probably just an illusion, or like a reference, really, which obviously Final Fantasy does a lot of, but it's still a really cool one. I do like this one, I got to say. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on these ones. There's tons of other Final Fantasy theories out there, loads of cool ones. Tons to do with like 7 Remake, 10, all these other ones. I may talk about them at some point, or speak about them at all. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. Just me rambling about some random fan theories that I don't think anyone else cares about. But yeah, if you did like it, then like and subscribe if you want to for more. It helps keep me motivated to do more of these. So yeah. Anyway, have a great rest of your day.